Live from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We're right across from the Supreme Court, next to the plaza on which our nation's capital is situated. It is Black Thursday, the 12th of March, the year of our Lord 2020. Stephen K. Bannon, Jack Maxey, the guy who runs the engine room of the War Room, to my right, and also my co-host on 2020, Jason Miller, who's been gracious enough to stay in and help us co-host. Since so much activity is happening here in the War Room, we're live on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Salem, broadcasting throughout the nation, America's Voice, the streaming platform of the Trump Revolution, now on the Dish Network, channel 219, also on FM 99.1 in Chicago and 103.9 in the Chicago suburb of Schaumburg. Also, we're on Nexus.org on the IRRS, that's the Italian radio network, shortwave and medium wave in northern Italy, also all throughout Central Europe and Germany, throughout the Middle East, in Africa, South America, South Asia, India, and China, and also on G News, where we put the show up later in the day, subtitled in Mandarin and Cantonese. Global platform, we reach 250 million English-speaking people throughout the shortwave and medium wave network of Nexus.org. We want to get all your comments. Also go to hashtag War Room Pandemic. We want you to be part of this show. There's two ways to do it. Go into the Nexus.org system and put up a comment. I get your comments every day now to the hundreds and not the thousands from people throughout the world. This is a world event. This pandemic, the World Health Organization finally caught up with War Room Pandemic. We named it a pandemic back in January. They did it on March 11th, named it a global pandemic. So thanks, World Health Organization, for finally catching up to reality. Over 100 countries have this. We're going to get to much of the world news, and Jason's going to be here to give us analysis of that. But I want to start with one of the big situations in the country is dramatic, bold action by the President of the United States. Last night on this address in the Oval Office, Jason and Jack, he did not call for a national emergency, basically pulling the trigger on the Stafford Act. We hear today that may be happening today. It's active discussion over in the White House. I want to bring on Jim Schultz, formerly the White House Counsel's Office, which is the lawyers inside the White House for the President of the United States. They actually represent the office of the President. Jim was one of the senior lawyers there. He's now a senior partner over at Cousins Law Firm in Philadelphia. And the reason we're bringing Jim in is Jim has actually been in the state of Pennsylvania, one of the head of the emergency measures there, and knows this backwards and forwards. Jim, thank you very much for joining us on War Room Pandemic.
Steve, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So let's go through what is the National Emergency Act? Why is it important for the president to pull the trigger on that, and what after he does that?
So let's talk a little bit about the states first, Steve. I was general counsel to the governor of Pennsylvania during a number of emergencies that occurred between 2011 and 2014, including Superstorm Sandy. Now, different situations, but nonetheless the same triggers, right? The reason why you, as a governor, you would trigger your emergency declaration is to allow certain funds to flow from the federal government and to be able to unlock funds from your own state government that you would otherwise had to ask the legislature permission to use, right? So, and then in addition, there's certain regulations and laws that are in place that hinder your ability to deal with whatever the emergency situation is. So you're seeing governors around the country like Larry Hogan rightfully issuing, declarations of emergencies so that he could get to the rainy day fund and also suspend certain regulations and certain laws that prevented him from doing a job in the area of health and human services, in the area of education, for instance. So because you see all the schools closing, secondary, post-secondary education schools closing. So I think that's important because that's what's feeding into, okay, now what do we do with the national emergency, right? You ask the question, emergency declaration. It's been done a number of times. The downside to issuing an emergency declaration is a lot of times these things stay open for years and years and years, and it's an executive power grab. So with the president and his people, this is really a legal question. What is going to be unlocked as a result of declaring a national emergency versus what the president could do with his executive powers now? Because the moment he declares a national emergency, the executive powers are going to expand in whatever areas that he deems it to be necessary in the declaration. And when that happens, you're also going to have either a pushback from Congress, who have been calling for, it's funny, the Democrats have been calling for a national emergency. But once they wake up and say, okay, the president now has more power than he did yesterday, what's their reaction to that going to be?
Let's unpack.
All of that,
hang on. Let's unpack one thing. If he declares the national emergency, does that augment the governors at the state level? The more funds flow for them, that they get more freedom to do things? What's the interconnection between like Cuomo and Murphy in New Jersey, Hogan in Maryland? They've already declared a state emergencies. Does declaring a national emergency, how does that change the difference between the federal government and its interactions with the state?
Well, it may be able to unlock additional funds, for instance, and that have been appropriated for something else, and be able to move them. We saw them. Remember when they were using the National Emergencies Act, Steve, in the immigration context, and talking about that being a national emergency and fitting into the context of the 1976, I believe, Declaration? You're going to see something. Those are the analysis. That's the analysis going on in the White House right now. Is whether this is going to garner additional powers for the executive branch to move funds around that they don't have to ask Congress, and through their appropriations power to do, and then also what regulatory and legislative issues are they going to have that they need to kind of suspend for at least the time being in order to accomplish the goal of protecting the American people, both from a health perspective and from an economic perspective during this pandemic.
Hey, Jim, it's Jack Maxey here. My understanding also for the president, doesn't it open up the military budget so that he can repurpose those funds for other things inside the country, which would be a heck of a war chest, if you will?
No question about it, right? That's what I mean. You're going to get to the point where they're going to be able to take funds that have been appropriated for other things and direct them towards this specific issue, right? And that's what the declaration of emergency is going to give them. Now, they may have that power right now under prior declarations of emergency. And I'm sure that there's lawyers poring over those declarations that have never been closed out, if you will, for years and years and years to determine whether they even have to do this. Because when you declare that national emergency, you hear the word emergency, and everyone that may cause additional panic in the hearts and minds of the American people. When you wouldn't have to make that declaration to accomplish those goals, there has to be that balance of what do we need versus, making this declaration and creating more chaos.
Okay, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, you were Don McGahn's wingman, and one of the reasons you were selected and your senior partner at one of the top firms in Philadelphia is you've got judgment. If you were there today, as you did many, many times in the couple of years you were at the White House, what would you be advising with the understanding you have of the National Emergency Act and the Stafford Act? What would you be advising the President of the United States?
I'd be asking questions of folks as to whether or not we absolutely need to declare an emergency or invoke the National Emergencies Act in order to unlock funds. We're seeing right now Congress is acting. Congress is working towards additional appropriations and other things to try to help this problem along.
A fiscal stimulus.
What do we know?
Jim,
but what do we need in addition to that programmatically to help this problem? If the answer is unlocking more funds through a declaration of a national emergency is a necessity, I'm advising the president today that he should declare a national emergency. If that's not necessary, and it's just more about what, this emergent issue, if you will, I say you hold back until you absolutely have to.
Let me take it a different direction with some details. And by the way, our guest is Jim Schultz, formerly from the White House Counsel's Office under President Trump, the first 2 years of President Trump's administration. Jim, 3 areas. Number one, in how's the National Emergency Act or his executive powers help this? There's 3 things that have to happen. Massive testing. You have to test. You've got to get that out there to everybody. Number 2 is then, if you've got it, social separation. What are the president's powers? You're seeing, because of, I think, liability, the basketball league shut down, NBA. You're seeing the tournaments have no thing. The colleges are sending kids home because of liability, but they're doing that individually. What powers does he have for enforcing social separation, or quarantine here in the United States. And the last is, how do you solve the hospital problem, the ICU problem? And does national emergency help you get cash to go serve? We have 100,000 beds. We're going to need a lot more. How does that help?
So most of your, for instance, college athletic conferences, I'll use that as an example, in their bylaws have language that says, look, if we're going to cancel a game or cancel a season or cancel anything, we're going to do that in concert with the members of the conference, the teams that are at issue, except in circumstances where the state directs us to act. So in instances like that, conferences like, and the NCAA, for instance, I'm sure the NBA, and we've already seen them shut down, and other organizations are going to take direction from the United States government voluntarily. I just do not see any instance where in this environment where no matter what, if the president were to direct the NCAAs to be canceled tomorrow, that the NCAA would exercise independent judgment on that, going against what the president, the federal government, HHS has recommended. If they were need to be suspended, I think they would likely listen. So to the extent that the president I don't believe the president needs additional at this point in time to go and do that, because I think that's accounted for in the bylaws of a lot of these organizations. What about
social separation and quarantining people? We're asking people to self-quarantine. Will the national emergency powers give him additional powers to actually enforce quarantine?
Yeah, I mean, there could be additional police powers added, and the states can have that as well when they declare a national emergency, for the public health of others. And anytime you're considering taking away the liberties or rights of American citizens, that has to be done with exceptional judgment, right? There has to be analysis that goes into that. And so when you're pulling that trigger and forcing people into their homes, that's a time when, yes, I think if we're getting to the point where we're forcing people into their homes, he's going to have to invoke the National Emergencies Act, and governors would likely have to do the same thing in the context of their police powers over their state.
Last thing, we'll let you go.
Remember, health care and insurance and all those things and testing, all that's going to be governed largely by the states anyway. Like the Larry Hogan, for instance, they had an exception from the day one that they could go and do their own testing.
Last question before we let you go. How do you think this develops over the next couple of days?
Look, we've already seen the reaction from the stock markets in the EU and their reaction to the travel ban, if you will. Obviously, that's going to impact them, the European markets dramatically, that they can't come to this country. I see that playing out as something that it was a smart play as it relates to protecting the American public. I think the president did a very good job early on of banning travel from countries where this virus was born or being generated. I think we need to continue to do that. I think the president needs to continue to talk to the American people. I thought the most effective press conference he had was that Sunday where he and Vice President Pence and the leadership kind of all did it together, because it gave the press an opportunity to ask questions. As if there wasn't enough information that came from the vice president or the president directly, they were able to ask questions of those individuals so that the American people were getting answers. I think there needs to be more of that in order to calm the fears of the American people as it relates to when they can travel, how they can travel, and all those issues. I think that last night his message was good. Going forward, if I were advising the president, I'd want to do it as a group, so that it looks like there's an ability to access information from the experts directly during those press conferences.
Jim Schultz, formerly of the White House Counsel's Office under President Trump, now at the Cousins Law Firm in Philadelphia. Thank you very much for joining us today on Pandemic. I want to turn now to Jason Miller. Jason, analysis, assessment, and also any breaking news.
Yeah, I just want to get to the breaking news. Major League Soccer has announced that they're suspending their season indefinitely. Speculation that NHL will be right behind where the NBA and MLS have gone. Also renewed speculation this morning that the NCAA will suspend or cancel the tournament this year. for March Madness.
March Madness will be canceled, not even played in front of family and friends.
So correct, because you're starting to see Dan Patrick, prominent sports reporters, start to say that they're concerned about this. We saw Jay Williams from ESPN make a similar comment. He's getting attacked online, and people are saying, why would you go and cancel it? Because very simply, I want to take folks back and say why this is important. Rudy Gobert, who's the center for the Utah Jazz, all-pro center, bit of a jerk, but he's an all-pro center. He's a very good player.
A bit?
He's a bit. So he gets done Monday, and he's hyping up and saying how this thing's all overblown. And he literally stands up and he reaches out and starts touching like the microphone and everything.
Like you got to set up right here. He's touching every
like
microphone, rubbing on it.
Rubbing on it, and he's basically just, like in your face. Well, he was the player who tested positive for coronavirus last night for the Utah Jazz.
The irony of it all.
Went from we're going to play this with no fans to we're just going to go and postpone the whole thing. So this is moving very quick. Tokyo this morning is saying that the Olympics will proceed as scheduled. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who genuinely thinks that is going to be the case.
Let's talk about what did you think of Jack Maxey, Jim Schultz? Jim Schultz said it's not a slam dunk, and one of the reasons that the president has extraordinary executive powers right now, you've really got to think through these issues before you declare the national emergency. Did you buy that?
Well, I think one of the things that our listeners have to understand, and we as Americans have to understand, under our federal system, the real power devolves down to the states. And we are all looking for the federal government to save us in some respect with a tax break or some change in monetary policy. But at the end of the day, these battles are going to be fought in the towns and communities of America. And I think it's a learning moment to a certain extent for people to see that the federal government really cannot take care of all your needs. You've got to be able to take care of them yourself and in your local community. All the money in the world is not necessarily going to solve all the problems that we're going to be confronting in short order.
Let's go to Nancy Pelosi. As we started the show, Nancy Pelosi, by the way, and Jason Miller can verify this, last night, right after the president got off, I said, when Nancy Pelosi put her bill up, I said she's going to let him bleed out on the stock market until 11 o'clock, and then she's going to step up and have a press conference. She hit the bid right at 11, didn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. And she went out there and said that we have a bill that's done, that's ready to go. That's pretty bill, no bill. Pretty powerful. She has a bill, right? Yeah. No, I mean, this is, quite frankly, I wish when President Trump got elected that Paul Ryan and the rest of the Republicans on the Hill had an Obamacare bill ready to go. I mean, but anyways, we'll talk about that another time. But look, Speaker Pelosi is out there saying, there is something that expands testing, provides sick leave for those who are affected, free school lunch. But there's nothing in there that actually impacts employers, that impacts small businesses, people who are going to be right on the front lines. People talk about missing a paycheck, but there's nothing in here to help the people who actually have to sign. She doesn't
really get kind of to the heart of the matter either, does she? She a little bit misses it.
No, this is basically just kind of it's a safety net that's being set up in all the wrong places, essentially.
Well, and that's why Mitch McConnell came back and said it was an ideological wish list, right? And you're kind of getting into the partisan politics of this, but somehow this is not what Jim Cramer came up with. And we're not saying all his stuff's perfect, but he gave the alternative. You have to have a massive show of force here, right? And he was talking about getting both the Fed involved, getting the Treasury involved, doing a massive stimulus, figuring it all out later, but you would deal with both the employers and the employees on multiple levels.
But the important thing here is Pelosi said, we have this bill done, we want to go, we want to get it done today. We're not going to stick around. So they're going to –
Hold it. She definitely said they're not sticking around.
Correct. She said that we have it ready to go. Republicans need to get on board. They're not going to stick around. They're unwilling to work with the Senate. They're basically either you get on board with us or we're going to pass this, but we're going to leave town. I think this is dangerous for Pelosi to go and play this political game. I think voters are, and not just voters, but citizens.
I think the American people
the American people are smart. They get this. They see when someone's trying to ram something down their throat. Look, President Trump, it was just asked in the Oval Office where he has I always mispronounce it, but the leader of Ireland, I always mispronounce what his title is.
Taoiseach?
Yeah, something like that.
It's the leader of Ireland.
Exactly. The position that Sean Spicer will one day hold. But he's in there with the president.
Not until he cleans up that delivery on Newsmax.
The president was asked a question, are you going to sign this House bill? And he basically said, I'll sign something if I need to. So he he did the right thing and not kind of go into the partisan aspect of it. But this is where I really call on the media to hold Pelosi's feet to the fire. This is time where Pelosi and the Democrats need to check their partisanship out the door, work with the Senate. Let's get something done because the country is in too dire of a position to be playing games with this and trying to expand new government bureaucracies and expand their and go into crazy town.
But also, it's the thing of leaving town.
Yeah.
I think you got to be here, right? They're shutting down some offices over there, but I think right now, however long it takes, the holiday or the go back, that can wait. You need to be here.
Who's to say they come back?
Well, we were laughing the other day. Remember when Nancy said, "Oh, we're not leaving. We're the captains of this ship."
Right.
Well, the captains are fleeing down the lines like rats right now.
Yeah, you can't. You got to stand on the bridge.
And the game that they're playing really should show the American people something. The Constitution requires the presence of the Senate to vote. So Congress is going to ram through a bill, vote on it, and then bail on the city, and then have the Senate debate it and stay present and vote on it. It just shows you how craven they really are operating.
Okay, we want to get everybody into the show. Anything else you got there, Jason? We got 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's just like here's some of the things that Pelosi's putting into this. Democratic changes to the Violence Against Women Act and changes they would say that provide federal funding for abortions. So these are things that Pelosi's trying to shove into this. Look, this is about the coronavirus, how we keep people safe, how we keep our economies going, so we can cut the checks. Pelosi, quit playing games.
# War Room Pandemic. We want you as part of this show. Jason Miller, thank you for sticking around. He's got to get on a very important call. Jack Maxey, Steve Bannon, Maria Louisa, Rossi Hawkins trying to get her on next on War Room Pandemic.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
It's Black Thursday, 12 March, year of our Lord 2020, a financial meltdown globally after the Oval Office address last night. Clearly, the capital markets did not like the direction of that. There's been some blowback. This is episode 40. We're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Salem Broadcast, AmericasVoice.news, which is now Dish, channel 219. Also, FM 99.1 in Chicago, 103.9 in the Chicago suburbs. And throughout the world on Nexus.org. We're in all the way from northern Italy up to Eastern Europe, into Russia, Africa, Latin America, South Asia, India, China, and also on G News. And you see the show later in the day, subtitled in Mandarin and Cantonese. Want to thank everybody throughout the world. # War Room Pandemic. Become part of the story. Jason Miller had to step out, get on a very important conference call where he's hearing additional information. Jack Maxey has joined me. We had Jim Schultz. We're trying to get Maria Louisa Rossi Hawkins on from Mediaset to talk to us about Italy. But I want to go to some breaking news. There was a photo over the President Trump had a dinner with President Bolsonaro on Saturday at Mar-a-Lago. The entire Bolsonaro team was there, and including the press secretary. And I think the press secretary was not feeling well. He's now been tested, and he's come back, Jack, testing positive for the virus?
Testing positive, according to Brazilian press, and he himself posted a picture with the president and the vice president from last weekend at Mar-a-Lago. They're all standing side by side. So this is becoming a concern, and we're seeing this around the world. Spain, several members of the legislature have it. They announced today that they are testing the king and queen. France has been forced to close down their parliament after at least 5 members tested positive, and also somebody who was serving at the snack bar in their parliament. So,
and we know that over 12% of the Iranian parliament we know have the virus, right?
Maybe even more than that. Iran has really fallen apart. They have complaining that they are running out of rubber gloves, let alone N95 masks and Tyvek suits. It's really becoming quite a disaster there.
# War Room Pandemic. We want to hear all your observations. We just talked to Jim Schultz about the national emergency. President Trump, I think they're debating that over whether he's going to declare that today. Regardless, as Jim Schultz says, he has extraordinary executive powers to work in this area. Obviously, the 3 areas you could see last night from the speech, and then today the action is testing. This full deployment now, and Vice President Pence reiterated that today on the morning show that they've now engaged the commercial labs, I think Quest and some of these other labs. So there's going to be this concept the CDC had between a reagent and this, extraction, and then it got a little complicated. I think now they've gone to other areas. There are going to be millions of these tests deployed, and we'll get to see the real number of how many people infected here in the United States.
And to that point, another great organization in America, private sector, Cleveland Clinic, has come out with a new test that can give you an answer in a matter of hours. And they are contemplating running drive-through testing, making this thing free for anyone who needs it. So this is how we're going to watch America come together, and you're going to watch the genius, not of the federal government, not of the tyranny of the bureaucracies that rule our lives, but you're going to start seeing individuals take agency for their communities and for the country, and that's where you're really going to see America shine.
The Cleveland Clinic is one of the greatest medical and health institutions in our country, and you see the entrepreneur spirit is all going to be out there. So, like President Trump said, nothing is inevitable. This is all about human action and human agency, but also we have to have full information. As used to teach me at Harvard Business School, the world is an efficient market, but you need pure, undiluted information to get out there. What you cannot have is ill-informed complacency. So that's why we do this show. We've done it every day of the week. Hashtag War and Pandemic now to Italy. The situation in Italy March 12th. I think it was the last day of February. We had Maria Luisa on a couple of days afterwards. I think it started with 2 patients, 2 sick in Italy 2 weeks ago. 2 sick. The next day went to 4. And David Ramaswamy, as he walked our audience through the concept of the exponential function, the concept of things doubling very quickly. Italy now, and people should understand this, Italy tried to take some measures early on. The first week in Italy, they did try to quarantine Lombardy, the northern part of the country. They did try to, send people home from the schools. They took some, not full actions, but they took some much more actions than we have taken in a lot of regard up until the last 48 hours. The Italians tried that. Now, you see last night, one of the senior members of the Italian medical community, a beloved figure, dies of this disease. And talk about the numbers.
Their health minister died yesterday, which I think sort of gives urgency to this thing. Italy now has over 12,000 infected. There are 827 dead. The numbers rose 31% in the space of 24 hours of the dead. So Italy is in a tremendous crisis. Now, one of the things I think our listeners have to understand is Italy has one of the highest demographics for elderly in all of Europe. So this highlights how important it is going to be to protect our most vulnerable citizens, and we're seeing these breakout in Seattle now being extended to maybe as many as a dozen other elderly homes in the area. And Great Britain today reporting that there's a coronavirus outbreak in a home there as well. So,
but here's one of the things we also have to focus on. Remember, in northern Italy, and this is why it was such an important issue, is that in northern Italy, it's one of the best medical systems in not just in Italy, it's in all of Europe. It's a very sophisticated medical system. And so to have that on the verge of collapse, and where's it collapsing? The ICU units. It is the intensive care units that are particularly a problem because people have very, and here in the United States, we have 1 million hospital beds. 100,000 of those, these are rough numbers, 100,000 of those, so 10% are ICU units. We talking to the head of infections at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica last week. He was saying this is going to be the gating issue. This is going to be the big problem is the ICU units. And you might be able to have a surge capacity of 20,000 in the United States. That's one of the reasons I think that the focus of NIH and others should be on getting surge capacity for intensive care. That's one of the things you're seeing in Italy. The same thing, and remember, this show started for the first week. We were principally focused just on Hubei province and just on Wuhan. Why? That's where the breakout came. But there's extraordinary efforts they were doing and taking and setting up quarantine centers. Remember, the Chinese, and look, the CCP have much blame on their hands on this. President Trump laid it out last night. Secretary Pompeo saying they suppressed this information for weeks and weeks and weeks. However, when they kicked it into gear, they built 2, not perfect, but built 2 quarantine hospitals in 10 days, right, to stand up. And the reason was these were all essentially ICU units to get out there. One of the concerns about Italy is you're seeing now the beginning. The health minister just died, and you're seeing the beginning of the potential collapse of the healthcare system.
You are, and also let's be real. Part of the reason they shut down the whole country was so that on an emergency basis they could move some overflow patients down to the south. And we'll see how that works out. But I think the consensus is that probably the infection is going to start breaking out in the south as well. And Italy is a perfect example of why we need to be extremely cautious here, because almost all the Western medical systems are designed to have extra beds, but very few of them really have the surge capacity that we're going to need in this kind of situation. Well,
I think somebody told me on the 100,000 of the ICU units, we run at essentially 85 to 90% capacity utilization all the time. I mean, you don't see a ton of ICU units out there. So already the normal sick take up most of our capacity. That's why the Saint said, hey, there may be ability to convert and get another 20,000, which would be huge, a 20% increase. But even that, if you listen to Tom Bossert and some of these other people, this is why testing is so important. You have to test to find out where the distribution in the population is of actually who's sick.
And I don't know if you guys can see this, but I think it's an illustration that would help everybody understand the whole purpose of social separation and what they call flattening the curve. And I just drew this down very easily, okay? You have population right here. You have hospital beds. That's your line right there. Then you have the rate of infection. As long as you can flatten out that curve and keep it below the number of hospital beds, you're okay. But if it goes crazy, all these people here are out of luck.
That's what you're seeing now when you see on media all the time. They're saying flattening the curve. That is flattening the curve. And here's how you do it. You find out who's actually got the virus, and then you do social separation. You do quarantining, self-quarantining, you do other quarantining. So this is why it's so important to get tested. You saw last night, and this is one of the problems we have, on a guy took the coronavirus test, got on a plane. This is a JetBlue flight from New York to Palm Beach, got additionally sick on the plane. People kind of noticed this. His wife kind of told people, hey, the guy got tested for the coronavirus. He lands, and the passengers are clearly upset. Now, what I didn't like about this, when the passengers, they kept it on the tarmac for 3 hours, then they just told the passengers to go home and kind of, do self-quarantine.
Right, and keeping it on the tarmac for 3 hours. We all know how those planes fog up when they're sitting there, so the airflow is probably even worse. Listen, people are going to make mistakes. This is the way this is going to play out, and this is really everywhere. And we were talking last week how people were going, oh, I can't believe they closed the schools. Oh, I can't believe they stopped soccer. And we said these are common sense measures that are going to be coming. This is just 4 or 5 days ago, and now we're canceling.
Well, I think this is why when we first started the show, we knew we'd get to a point where now you're having people like Tom Hanks, who has tested positive, he and his wife, Rita Wilson, in Australia making a movie, I think with Baz Luhrmann. I think it's an Elvis Presley movie that he is now tested positive. They're going to quarantine themselves. You've seen the NBA and other institutions here in the United States, National Hockey League, all the sports leagues. Iconic for our international listeners, the college basketball tournament is one of the most iconic events in the American social schedule. We call it March Madness. That looks like it's going to be, at first they were saying they're not going to play with any patrons. I think now they're talking about canceling it. So this is starting to happen. Major League Baseball obviously is not going to open on April 1st. There'll be something there. I'm sure they're going to come out with an announcement on Major League Baseball here shortly. So you're starting to see major impact into American life, just the American natural flow of the social calendar.
And these are private organizations that are making these decisions. Nobody from the CDC called up the NCAA and said, you got to end the tournament. These are private organizations making rational decisions with the information that they have at hand. That's why we try in this show to always give you guys the solid information. Sometimes,
here's the information. The board of directors is the fiduciary responsibility and liability. They understand you have a tournament and 10 people get sick, you're going to have 10 big lawsuits. Right, so that's why you got to shut it down, because it's just you don't know. You can't take that.
You don't know.
You can't take that. You can't take that. You can't take that risk. Where else do we got? Where else do we have on the? What else do we have? Let's go back to Italy for a second.
Italy is, it's a country in crisis, and here we have this place that's all in our minds. This beautiful country with beautiful people, and I think one thing that will be really important for all of us to understand. We've been at war for 18 years now, and of course we've heard about these Green Berets and our wonderful SEALs and people at the sharp tip of the spear. I think that the American people are going to see some new heroes, and they're going to be our first responders, our doctors, our nurses. These people are going to lead a lot of support from their fellow citizens. And I think all of us together really have to, prepare ourselves both mentally and emotionally for what's coming.
Let's go to the White House. President Trump took comments a few minutes ago, say he's going to may cancel campaign rallies. One thing about this, in all this shock, we had the pandemic, we've had this economic. Remember, the economic issue here is, one, the perturbations in the economy between hotels, travel, all the ancillary businesses associated with the sports leagues and all the social stuff we do. In addition, you've got the deeper systemic issue about a supply chain, and that particularly deals around things like drugs, like APIs not made here, all the generic drugs, also the masks, the medical consumables, the gloves, all that. And then the deeper systemic, which is the supply chain being back in China. And we still don't know fully information coming out of China, whether that's accurate or not, and did these factories open back up, and the logistics change being tied to that. We don't manufacture as much as we should or we need to. And on top of all that, a financial now crisis set up about the stock and the bond market, the credit market. Add on top of that this dispute between Saudi Arabia and Russia, which is pretty historic, about OPEC and trying to break OPEC, and about the oil. And President Trump just said lower gas prices are similar to a tax cut. That is accurate, but it also kind of misses the point. What that attack is by Russia and Saudi Arabia I think went full gangster, and Putin, it is to destroy the fracking industry in the United States. One of the major legs of President Trump's economic program, full spectrum energy dominance, is built upon America being an exporter of oil and gas. And the fracking industry in Texas, in Pennsylvania, in the northern plains up in North Dakota, in Anadarko down in Oklahoma, is one of the backbones of this industry. Those companies are literally getting destroyed. Last night after the talk, oil prices dropped $6 a barrel. Why? If you stop in flights coming from Europe, the airline industry is already hurting. If you're going to stop flights for 30 days, the airline industry is going to take a hit. That's why right now, when they talk about bankruptcies, they talk about jobs, they talk about livelihoods. What people are looking at is the oil patch, right? The oil patch, and there's been some discussion about stepping in and helping them with their credit facilities. But yes, lower oil prices are the equivalent of a tax cut. However, the industry being decimated and actually shutting down, because the Saudis and the Russians have always wanted to destroy the American, particularly the fracking, the marginal producer there. And right now, our basic break-even cost is $40 a barrel. They're down at $30 a barrel less, so they're driving in. So that's like throwing gasoline onto a napalm fire, right? It's
the other thing, though, is I think we can't totally conflate the oil war being prosecuted on us by Russia and Saudi Arabia with the greater problem, which is there is less demand for oil globally. And Steve, I think we called it 2 weeks ago when we came up with a data point that China at that point had imported 12%.
Yeah, not a 12% drop. It was an 88% drop.
Right.
That's a showstopper.
Right. And then you see the skies of China are totally clear. I don't know why Greta Thunberg hasn't come out with a positive statement about that, but
let's go. She's taking too much time to make heckle calls to Prince Harry. Oh, that was the two Russian guys, right? So let's go to else around the world. We've had, and what we're looking at is this, what Dave Ramaswamy came on here and talked to our audience about. We're going to have Dave back on over the weekend. We'll be doing some specials. We'll get you all up to speed on that. Talked about the concept of exponential growth, the concept of the exponential function or exponentiality, that it means when you double. He told it the thing of playing chess. So this mythic story in India where the guy who invented chess, the king was going to give him any gift, and he says, well, just take the 64 things. I want a kernel of rice on the first one. I want 2 kernels of rice on the second. I want 4 kernels of rice. Halfway through the board, and the king said, hey, fine, not a problem. But this guy's a nut. We'll give him the rice. Halfway through the board, he had all the rice in India. Right? That's this function. And you see these graphs. In fact, we ought to get some of these graphs up on the site today. We ought to chart every one of your countries. In fact, if you've got an interest, just go to #WarRoomPandemic. But you see particularly Italy, and this is why it's so scary. Italy's now into the exponential growth explosion phase. I think you're starting to see it in the United Kingdom. Angela Merkel, and hey, everybody knows I'm not a man, and she's no Steve Bannon fan. However, she's a PhD in chemistry. She's a very serious. I don't agree with her policies, but she's smart. When she steps up yesterday and says, "Hey, I think 60 or 70% of our population could have this."
Well, you're watching different locations handle this differently. For example, Germany, I think, has acknowledged that this stuff is out there, and they're going to try and work on containment versus quarantine. We're actually even seeing this in Northern California, where around Sacramento, they've essentially given up on case tracking. And instead of trying to say every single person who ever came in contact with someone with the coronavirus, all stay home, they're saying, look, stay home if you feel sick, but otherwise come to work because we need the EMTs, we need the garbage guys, we need everybody, on the job. Now, there is some more, a little bit disturbing news about the virus. There's more speculation that really the vast majority of people who are communicating this to others are asymptomatic. There's more studies that have been coming out on this, and it's making it more difficult to control.
This is what's one of the things that's so serious. We had Dr. Stephen Hatfield on at the very beginning of our broadcast. It's you may be at some of your most infectious when you're asymptomatic.
Yes.
Right? This is what makes this thing so scary. In the asymptomatic phase of this may last 10 days or 14 days or whatever. But there's a period of time when you're actually maybe at your most, the ability to pass it on to somebody else. The R-OT number we talked about, right? And that's one of the things, exponential. If you have the virus and you pass on to 2 or 3 people, that's where you have an explosion. Remember, we'll put up the chart. 2.5 weeks ago, Italy had 2 people infected, or 2 people that logged in infection. Today, it's got over, 10,000?
12,000.
12,000, and it's exploding.
And almost 900 dead.
900
had
dead.
A significant increase overnight. A little country that might be interesting for the viewers to keep an eye on. Iceland has 90 confirmed cases. Now, this is in a country with 360,000 people. So, theoretically, today, Iceland may have the highest per capita rate of infection in the world.
And that came from the Milan. They think that came from the Milan fashion show. Remember, it's the Fashion Week, which is one of the most important weeks in the fashion industry, which is a quite large industry globally. It's a global business, really, out of Milan. That's the most important fashion week where the designers are showing their stuff. A lot of the Greece and Iceland, I said, and some other countries came from that.
I think the first guy in Iceland did. Now, Iceland, being a liberal democracy, much like America, is having a hard time actually getting people to quarantine because they're kind of like, hey, if everyone's going to get it, what am I doing? But, this social separation, reducing the arc of that curve, making it flat below the number of beds.
We're going to call it Jack's curve. Jack's flattening. We're going to get up. Okay, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. Tonight at 7 p.m., I'm going to be doing a Facebook Live with the Columbiana County GOP. I was supposed to be out there speaking tonight, but the governor has gone through and done, I think, appropriately to shut down and make sure there are no large groups. I'm going to do a live stream on everybody. We'll have it up on the site about how you can participate. We're going to be announcing specials a lot. We're going to be doing a lot more War Room Pandemic. We're going to be a lot more hours during the day. We're going to start doing it on the weekends. We're working with our partners at the John Fredericks Radio Network and also at America's Voice.News, now Dish, Channel 219. To participate, go to our webpage, warroompandemic.org. Go to hashtag warroompandemic. If you're listening to this on shortwave or middle wave radio, make sure you go to nexus.org and leave a comment. I read these every night now. Your comments all the way from Bogota, Colombia, to Russia, to India. Want to hear all your voices. Remember, we're here for you 24 hours a day in the War Room. Stephen K. Bannon, Jack Maxey, until tomorrow at 10 a.m. We will see you. Stay safe.